While Israel agreed to release almost 2,000 Palestinian captives as part of the ceasefire, there was one prisoner they absolutely refused to hand over. Marwan Barghouti, sometimes described as Palestine's Nelson Mandela, is by far the state's most popular leader. He's been held in Israeli prisons for 23 years without ever having faced a fair trial. On Wednesday night, his son, Arab Barghouti, revealed what other released Palestinians had told him about the violence his father has recently suffered at the hands of Israel. So he said this: "What we know is that while they were transferring my father, they stopped along the way, and 8 security guards within the prison authority that worked for the prison authority started beating my father up in different ways by kicking him, by throwing him on the ground, by punching him, focusing on the head area, chest area, and legs as well," he said, adding that his father later told fellow prisoners he lost consciousness as a result of the attack. The released detainees say that when he came to Megiddo, he could barely walk for days. Now, according to Arab Barghouti, Israel's Security Minister Ben-Gvir also showed the 66-year-old prisoner a picture of an electric chair and told him he deserved to be executed. So why is Israel so keen to keep Marwan Barghouti behind bars and far away from Palestinian politics? Well, last night, Arab Barghouti appeared on Channel 4 News, where he was asked what role his father might play in a Palestinian state were he released.
There is speculation or hope that there may be elections for the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian government, within the next year or so. I mean, is it your father's wish to contest those elections and to be released in time?
I will have to wait until I talk to him. I haven't talked to him in 3 years. I think that knowing him, in a few years ago, when we were supposed to have elections, he declared and announced that he will be running for president. And I think that this is an encouraging thing. You're talking about someone who's, again, trusted by the Palestinian people, and we haven't had a trusted leadership for a very long time. I think elections are very positive towards the Palestinian people and the Palestinian political system overall. We need more youth in power. We need more women participation in power. We need leadership that we actually trust. So it's not only about my father, but my father represents that voice that is reasonable by the Palestinian people. And I really hope, as someone who hasn't even voted before in my life, it's my dream that we have elections as soon as possible and we get to choose our leadership.
Barghouti was also asked more generally about Gaza.
Is he someone who could also reach out to the leaders in Gaza if he was allowed to communicate? Is he still effectively cut off at the moment?
Yes, he hasn't been able to. We haven't had any access to him in years. In 3 years, we haven't been able to talk to him as a family. But the lawyer has been able to see him only 5 or 6 times. And yes, I do think that he has the legitimacy and moral authority to be able to bring and build the bridges between all Palestinian factions and to have political partnership between all Palestinians. And unity has been always his political legacy. If you go back to the prisoner's document in 2006, he brought every single Palestinian faction, and until today, it's the only signed document by all Palestinian factions. And that stated clearly that the Palestinian state will be built on the 67 borders. Resistance should be limited to within the 67 borders, and the targeting of civilians should be forbidden. So he is someone who is capable of taking political initiatives that are reasonable, accepted by everyone, and that's exactly why this fascist government fears him.
And that's exactly why they won't release him. What's often frustrating is you hear people who are, supporters of the Israeli state, supporters of the Israeli government, who say, well, what can they do? They don't have anyone to negotiate with on the other side. It's either the Palestinian Authority, who don't really have any legitimacy because there haven't been elections in a very long time and they're seen as sort of stooges collaborating with Israel, or Hamas, who are all terrorists, according to the interlocutor. Now, Marwan Barghouti is someone who does seem, from the polling, from recent history, like someone who could unite the Palestinian people so that they're not divided between the PA in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. But that's obviously exactly what Israel don't want, because a united Palestinian people would create more pressure for a genuinely sovereign state. Of course, Britain and the majority of the UN has now recognized Palestine as being a state, but that doesn't mean it has in any way viable sovereignty. In the UK, one political party is calling for Marwan Barghouti's release. This was the Green Party's Ellie Chowns in Parliament, on Wednesday.
One of the Palestinian prisoners who has not been released is Mr. Marwan Barghouti, a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council who's been in prison since 2002 without a fair trial and subjected to human rights abuses. Can I ask the Prime Minister what recent representation his government has made in the last few days to secure the immediate release of Mr. Barghouti, given his widespread popularity as a unifying voice for Palestinian rights, dignity and freedom, and therefore his potential crucial role in securing a meaningful and lasting peace in the region?
Can I thank you for raising the individual case and offer to provide her with such further information as we can, as soon as we can, in relation to that particular case.
He won't even say his name in relation to that particular case. Sort of like Starmer's lawyer, sort of like, why not? Sort of, I suppose he says, well, maybe he's done some crimes in the past. I don't want to upset the Israel lobby, I suppose. Dalia, I mean, I have to say, I was not remotely surprised that Israel didn't release Marwan Barghouti. I mean, I do think it is very telling, though, that this is someone who, the most plausible candidate as to someone who could unite the Palestinian people to negotiate a two-state solution. I think Marwan Barghouti has explicitly backed a two-state solution, yet they will not release him.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning as well that Marwan's name was on the list of prisoners to be part of the prisoner exchange, the list that was signed by the US, and Israel, in the middle of the night, as they often do, just sort of removed his name off the list without any explanation, despite the fact that that was part of the agreement and a really important part of the agreement, and was part of the agreement that the US signed on to as well. So, Israel has no masters. It has no one it is accountable for, not even the US, because it is able to just sort of within hours essentially violate one of the most important parts of the agreement, which is the names on the prisoner list shortly after it was agreed. Over the past 2 years, a lot of people, particularly kind of liberals and others around the world, who have sort of just tuned in to the politics of the region, but for some reason think that they have the moral authority and the intellectual expertise to interpret the events of the region. They always would say this, this thing, where is the Palestinian Mandela? Where is the Palestinian Mandela? And the subtext of that is essentially that what is happening to the Palestinians is their fault because they chose a path of violence. They chose to not express their resistance in the way that we believe a deserving people should behave. Now, the answer to where is the Palestinian Mandela is the Palestinian Mandela is currently being tortured in an Israeli dungeon, and his name is Marwan Barghouti. And when we talk about Israeli prisons, when we talk about the kinds of conditions that someone like Marwan Barghouti will be in, we're not talking about prisons in a conventional sense. This about me, Michael. I believe that all prisons are dehumanizing places, but Israeli prisons that hold Palestinians are more like torture camps. They are essentially just these complete black holes that are ungoverned by any kind of legal norm or moral boundary. We are talking about systematic sexual, psychological, physical torture, no access to legal representation. Many of them, including Marwan Barghouti, have not had access to a fair trial. Some of them haven't had access to a trial at all. They have absolutely no connection to the outside world. We heard from Marwan Barghouti there that he has not spoken to his father in 3 years. It is torture for the people inside those prisons, and it is torture for their families and loved ones who are waiting outside of those prisons, knowing what their relatives and their loved ones are going through, because Palestinians have testimony from people who have been held in these camps, these essentially what are camps, and they know what goes on. And so they are sitting, waiting for the return of their loved ones, who they know with every passing day their loved ones are going through the most unimaginable horrors. So it is an assault on the people inside the prison, and it is an assault on the people outside of the prison as well, on the whole Palestinian community. And I want to also come back to this notion of, Barghouti commonly being touted as the Palestinian Mandela. And of course, people retroactively remember Nelson Mandela as being kind of the idealized freedom fighter, when, of course, at the time, he was, like the Palestinians in those prisons, considered to be a terrorist, not just by the apartheid regime, but also by our own governments. Thatcher and Reagan famously considered Nelson Mandela to be a terrorist. But the reason that Barghouti is called the Palestinian Mandela is for the reason that you outlined there, Michael, which is that he is one of the only, I would argue, the only figure that can unify Palestinians across the West Bank and Gaza, across the secular and Islamist divide, across the factions between those who believe in a particular kind of armed resistance and those who believe in the diplomatic process. He is one of the only people that could possibly lead a Palestinian state cohesively, a united Palestinian state, much like Nelson Mandela was viewed as a person who could feasibly lead a post-apartheid South Africa. Marwan Barghouti is understood to be someone who can lead a post-occupation Palestine. And this is at a moment where the Palestinians are incredibly divided by a systematic program of divide and rule by the Israeli occupation. And so his release and his ability to stand in elections represents a direct threat to the Israeli strategy of divide and rule when it comes to the Palestinians. But we have to remember that the freeing of Mandela, who could then be someone who could stand in elections and lead a post-apartheid South Africa, was the result of, it wasn't because of the benevolence of, the apartheid regime that he was released. It was because of a concerted and steadfast resistance movement within South Africa, and also the alienation and isolation of the apartheid regime by national governments around the world. Now, famously, the UK was one of the last to join that ship. But we eventually did. And that kind of global isolation was what caused the apartheid regime to fall. And for South Africa to have, the release of Mandela and then a future after apartheid. We aren't in that moment yet. And that is why we are in this situation. We are not at that moment yet where national governments around the world are willing to isolate Israel in order to have them create, in order for the conditions for a cohesive Palestinian state and sovereignty to emerge. I mean, we're in a position where Keir Starmer will not even say his name in Parliament. So I think we can use that kind of that example both as a source of inspiration that, eventually Mandela was freed, and, Marwan Barghouti himself, who has, by the way, also led movements and led political consciousness from within jail. He has often talked about, I know that one day I will be free because of his faith and his steadfastness. But we also have to be very realistic about what kind of conditions need to be in place for that to happen, and how far our national governments are from being there. And it is our responsibility, of course, to push them to that point. Much like in South Africa, BDS is a really key part of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is kind of the only model that makes any sense, which is just mass international pressure on Israel to say you can't do this, and that will have to be led from the bottom up, as it was in South Africa.